It's a black and white photograph, faded and slightly curled at the edges. The caption reads simply, State Street, Chicago, 1903. A wide boulevard stretches toward the horizon, trolley tracks gleaming in afternoon light, storefronts lining both sides with their ornate cornices and display windows. The exposure is crisp, the architecture sharp, yet the sidewalks stand empty. No pedestrians, no carriages, no life. This is State Street at what should have been its busiest hour, in a city approaching 2 million residents, and the frame captures nothing but absence. The official explanation speaks of long camera exposures requiring stillness, but other photographs from the same year show crowded fairgrounds, packed exhibition halls, faces frozen mid-laugh. Why then do so many street photographs from this era, across multiple cities, multiple photographers, multiple decades, show the same impossible emptiness? What happened to all the people who should have been there? In 1893, when the Chicago World's Fair opened its gates to what officials claimed were 27 million visitors over 6 months, it presented itself as the definitive triumph of human progress. The Columbian Exposition, as it was formerly known, showcased electric streetlights that turned night into day, the first Ferris wheel rising 26 stories above the fairgrounds, and the Court of Honor, a collection of neoclassical buildings so grand they seemed lifted from ancient Rome. Newspapers called it the White City, a vision of what modern civilization could achieve. Official photographs show crowds streaming through the grounds. Though faces in the background blur into indistinct shapes, their features lost to what we're told was simply the limitation of photographic technology. Yet foreground figures, when they appear, remain remarkably sharp. The architecture itself presents its own puzzle. These buildings, covering 600 acres, were supposedly constructed in under 3 years by a workforce whose size varies wildly depending on which contemporary account you read. Some structures featured such intricate classical detailing, coffered ceilings, carved entablatures, precise Corinthian columns, that modern architects examining the photographs express quiet skepticism about the timeline. The official story speaks of plaster and wood frames, temporary structures meant to dazzle, then disappear. But the photographs show something that looks far more permanent, far more precisely executed than hasty fabrication would allow. By 1900, Chicago's population had surged to nearly 2 million, a staggering increase from just over 500,000 2 decades earlier. The official narrative credits this to immigration and opportunity, the magnetic pull of industrialization drawing workers from across the Atlantic. Census records from the period confirm these numbers, columns of names, ages, occupations filling page after page of leather-bound ledgers. Yet when genealogists began digitizing these records in the late 20th century, patterns emerged that official histories had never quite addressed. Thousands of entries listed no birthplace or marked origin as simply unknown. Family researchers searching for ancestors hit dead ends, surnames with no European equivalents, individuals appearing fully formed in the 1890 census with no prior record, children listed with parents who themselves had no documented existence before 1880, immigration logs meticulously maintained at Ellis Island and other ports of entry don't account for the sheer scale of newcomers. The numbers don't align. The city absorbed waves of people who seem to have materialized without the traditional paper trail of migration. No ship manifests, no border crossings, no documented journey. How does a city suddenly house hundreds of thousands of people whose origins dissolve upon investigation? The official answer speaks of lost records, of fires that consumed immigration documents, of bureaucratic gaps. But the pattern repeats itself in city after city across America. The same demographic impossibility, arsenic echoing from coast to coast. The Chicago Auditorium building, completed in 1889, stands as one of the period's most ambitious architectural achievements. 10 stories of brick and granite, containing a 4,000-seat theatre with perfect acoustics, built in just 3 years. Photographs from its construction show the structure seemingly appearing in stages. Foundation 1 month. Complete external walls a few months later. Fully operational within a timeline that modern construction engineers find difficult to reconcile with available technology. The building required revolutionary engineering. A floating foundation to support its massive weight on Chicago's unstable soil, an early steel frame, an innovative air circulation system. The architects, Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan, are credited with genius that bordered on the impossible. Yet they were far from alone. Across America and Europe, the late 19th century produced an extraordinary flowering of architectural achievement. Grand civic buildings, opera houses, railway stations, structures that today require years of planning and construction, appeared in months. The official explanation credits the Industrial Revolution, new materials, improved techniques. But when we examine the photographic record, we see buildings that required such precise stone carving, such intricate metalwork, such advanced engineering solutions, that the available workforce seems inadequate to the task. Perhaps most puzzling are the infrastructure projects, massive stone bridges built in remote areas where railways were planned but never arrived, elaborate water systems constructed before cities grew large enough to need them, underground tunnels whose purposes remain unclear even in contemporary documents. In 1906, a photographer named George Raymond Lawrence captured an aerial view of San Francisco days after the earthquake. The technology, a camera suspended from kites, was groundbreaking enough to make international news. But the image itself reveals something the disaster hadn't caused. Entire city blocks showing almost no people in the streets, despite the photograph being taken midday during active reconstruction efforts. This wasn't simply a moment of poor timing. The pattern appears repeatedly in archival collections across the United States. Philadelphia in 1904, broad avenues empty despite census figures, claiming a population of over 1 million. Detroit in 1890, newly paved streets with no pedestrians visible for blocks. St. Louis, Boston, New York. The same phenomenon appears in photograph after photograph, city after city, decade after decade. The official explanation remains consistent. Long exposure times required subjects to remain impossibly still, so photographers shot early morning before crowds gathered, or asked people to vacate frames, or simply waited for quiet moments. Yet we have photographs from the same years showing packed World's Fair crowds frozen mid-stride, faces clear, motions stopped. The technology existed to capture movement, so why do urban street scenes, particularly those showing newly completed infrastructure, so consistently show empty spaces where thriving populations should have been? Where did all the people go? Or more troubling still, where were they before the photographs claimed they were there? Between 1854 and 1929, the orphan train movement relocated more than 200,000 children from East Coast cities to families across the American heartland. The Children's Aid Society and similar organizations kept meticulous records, names, approximate ages, physical descriptions, destination towns. What they rarely recorded were origins. Log after log lists children as parents deceased, family unknown, or simply foundling. No birth records, no death certificates for the supposed parents, no documentation of the circumstances that led to this mass displacement of youth. In New York alone, thousands of children per year entered the system during the 1890s and early 1900s. Some entries note European immigrants, Irish or Italian or German surnames, giving clues to heritage, but a disturbing number have no ethnic identifiers, no background stories, no personal histories. They appear in the ledgers as if generated by the system itself. Modern genealogists working backward from adopted families hit walls trying to trace these children's origins. DNA testing in the 21st century has revealed even stranger patterns. orphans supposedly from the same institution, showing no genetic connection to any population centres they claimed to represent. The official narrative speaks of urban poverty, of disease, taking parents, of social upheaval in rapidly industrialising cities. But why such comprehensive erasure of identity? Why were so many origins left deliberately unrecorded? And why does this pattern of mass child displacement coincide so precisely with the same decades showing demographic impossibilities and empty city streets? The Palace of Fine Arts, constructed for San Francisco's 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition, shouldn't exist as it does. Photographs from before the earthquake show no trace of it. Planning documents suggest construction began in 1913, yet the structure that appears in photographs from opening day displays architectural sophistication that defies its supposed 2-year construction timeline. A massive Roman rotunda with Corinthian columns, elaborate sculptural details, a lagoon and classical peristyle. The architect, Bernard Maybeck, claimed it was built from temporary materials, wood frame and plaster meant to last only the exposition's duration. But when demolition came, workers discovered the structure was far more permanent than records indicated. Similar mysteries surround other grand buildings from this era. Courthouses appearing fully formed in towns that barely existed a decade earlier. Railway stations more elaborate than the populations they served could justify. Cathedral-scale churches in frontier communities. The official history credits optimism and ambition, communities building beyond their immediate needs in anticipation of growth. But the photographs tell a different story. Infrastructure that appears before the people who supposedly demanded it. Architecture that seems inherited rather than constructed. Buildings whose completion dates don't align with the documented availability of labour, materials, or funding. These aren't cases of ambitious overbuilding. They're cases of structures that appear anachronistic. Too advanced, too complete, too precisely executed for the official timeline to accommodate comfortably. As if they were already there, waiting to be repopulated and claimed as new achievements. By the 1890s, the same patterns began appearing simultaneously across continents. Paris hosted its 1889 Exposition Universelle, featuring the newly constructed Eiffel Tower and massive exhibition halls built in what official records claim was under 2 years. London expanded its underground railway network through neighbourhoods that photographs show as strangely underpopulated. Berlin's Reichstag building, completed in 1894 after supposedly 10 years of construction, displays architectural precision that modern engineers find difficult to reconcile with available technology. The synchronicity is striking. Within a 15-year window, major cities across Europe and America experience the same demographic surge, the same architectural flowering, the same appearance of grand infrastructure, the same photographic emptiness in newly developed areas. Census records from Paris show population jumps that mirror Chicago's. London's orphanage system processed thousands of children with unknown origins, using nearly identical intake forms to those in New York. Architectural styles, neoclassical revival, Beaux-Arts grandeur, appeared simultaneously across oceans, as if following a shared blueprint. The official explanation credits global communication, the spread of ideas through international expositions, the natural convergence of industrial progress. But the timing suggests something more coordinated. Same systems appearing in multiple countries, same demographic patterns, same architectural impossibilities, same photographic anomalies, as if the entire Western world underwent not gradual modernization, but synchronized transformation following a template that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. Railway bridges exist across North America that lead nowhere. Elaborate stone viaducts crossing valleys where tracks were supposedly planned but never laid. The official explanation claims economic downturns halted expansion, or better routes were discovered, or companies went bankrupt mid-construction. But these aren't hasty constructions or partially completed projects. They're finished bridges, complete with decorative stonework, drainage systems, precision engineering, built at enormous expense for railways, that no contemporary documents show ever being seriously planned. In rural Pennsylvania, a massive stone arch bridge spans a gorge with no evidence of rails ever reaching either side. In the Pacific Northwest, elaborate trestle systems cross canyons in areas where population density never justified such infrastructure. Underground, the mysteries deepen. Cities from Chicago to Seattle contain networks of tunnels whose purposes remain officially unclear. Some are attributed to coal tunnels, others to smuggling routes, still others to private transportation systems for the wealthy. But their scale and construction quality suggest infrastructure built for purposes that no official history adequately explains. Road systems paved through areas that remained unpopulated for decades. Water systems with capacity far exceeding the populations they served. These aren't cases of optimistic overbuilding. They're cases of infrastructure that preceded the civilization that supposedly demanded it, as if the landscape itself was being prepared for something that hadn't yet arrived, or was being restored to accommodate something that had been removed. The evidence accumulates until a disturbing hypothesis emerges. What if the late 19th century wasn't a period of explosive human progress, but of systematic repopulation? What if the cities weren't built by the people who inhabited them, but inherited by populations deliberately introduced to pre-existing infrastructure? The anomalies align: demographic surges without adequate documentation, orphan waves without recorded origins, architectural achievements that outpace available technology, infrastructure built before populations arrived, empty streets in supposedly thriving cities, synchronicity across continents suggesting coordinated rather than organic development. The reset hypothesis proposes that something happened, a disaster perhaps, or a deliberate reorganization, that erased or displaced previous populations, leaving behind architecture, infrastructure, and systems that new inhabitants were gradually introduced to occupy. These new populations, many without clear genealogical origins, were given simplified narratives: immigration, industrialization, progress. The orphan trains weren't rescuing street children, but processing youth without verifiable origins into a new social structure. The World's Fairs weren't showcasing new achievements, but reintroducing inherited technology. The photographs showing empty streets weren't technical limitations, but documentary evidence of a repopulation still in progress. This theory doesn't claim proof. The evidence remains circumstantial, patterns requiring interpretation. But it offers an explanation that the official narrative struggles to provide: a coherent framework for understanding why so many anomalies cluster in the same decades, why documentation systematically fails at critical points, why infrastructure precedes population, why origins dissolve under investigation. If this hypothesis holds any truth, the implications for genealogy become profound. How many family histories, traced backward through generations, hit walls in the 1880s or 1890s? How many ancestry searches end in census records, listing unknown origins or parents with no documented existence? DNA testing companies report that significant percentages of their databases show genetic markers that don't align with reported family narratives. European heritage that doesn't match supposed countries of origin, American natives with genetic profiles suggesting different geographical roots than oral histories claim. The official explanation credits imprecise record keeping, the chaos of immigration, natural mixing of populations over time. But what if the discontinuity runs deeper? What if entire generations were introduced without complete genealogical connection to claimed ancestors? The psychological implications are staggering. Identity rests on lineage, on knowing where we came from. If that foundation proves constructed rather than organic, If our ancestors weren't who we thought they were, or came from circumstances deliberately obscured, then what remains solid in our understanding of ourselves? This isn't ancient history. This touches people 4 or 5 generations back, great-grandparents whose origins suddenly become questionable, family stories that don't align with documentary evidence, genetic tests revealing impossibilities in supposedly clear ancestral lines. The disruption extends beyond individual families to entire communities, built on shared origin stories that evidence increasingly struggles to support. Who benefits from the official narrative? If a reset occurred, who orchestrated it, and why has no documentation emerged? Conspiracy theories require conspirators. Yet the scale of coordination this hypothesis demands seems impossible to maintain across generations. Without leaks, without insiders coming forward, without documentary evidence surfacing, the moral calculus becomes complex. If populations were deliberately displaced and new inhabitants introduced under false narratives, the injustice is staggering. Entire generations robbed of true identity, given manufactured histories, processed through systems designed to obscure rather than illuminate origins. But the official narrative has its own moral weight. If historians, genealogists, and institutions have maintained a false history for over a century, whether through deliberate deception or collective failure to question accepted explanations, the betrayal of trust runs equally deep. Both possibilities demand reckoning. Perhaps the truth lies not in deliberate conspiracy, but in something more organic, a collective amnesia. Societies rebuilding after catastrophe and simplifying their past for psychological survival. Later generations inheriting simplified narratives and never questioning the gaps. Or perhaps documentation exists, hidden in archives we haven't properly examined, waiting for investigators willing to pursue patterns wherever they lead. The moral burden shifts to our generation. Do we have the obligation to investigate these anomalies, or is there value in maintaining consensus narratives even when evidence suggests they're incomplete? What does it cost to accept an alternative history? Communities fracture along epistemological lines. Those who demand absolute proof before questioning official narratives, those willing to explore anomalies even without definitive answers, those who find the entire investigation threatening to their sense of stability. Family gatherings become minefields when ancestry comes up. Online forums explode with arguments between defenders of academic consensus and pattern recognizers who see accumulated evidence demanding new explanations. The psychological toll manifests in various ways. Some experience liberation, freed from narratives that never quite fit their intuition or family oral histories. Others feel unmoored, their identity foundations suddenly unstable. Still others react with anger at investigators they accuse of spreading baseless theories that undermine legitimate historical research. Universities and institutions face pressure from both sides. Publish research on these anomalies and risk accusations of promoting conspiracy theories. Ignore the patterns and face charges of gatekeeping truth. The divide isn't easily bridged because it rests on fundamentally different epistemological approaches. Must we accept only what establishment consensus confirms, or should accumulated anomalies that consensus can't adequately explain warrant alternative investigation? Neither side holds monopoly on intellectual honesty. Both defenders of official narratives and alternative investigators can present evidence, show gaps in opposing arguments, demonstrate where speculation exceeds data. What remains unclear is whether this investigation brings us closer to truth or simply fractures shared reality further. The investigation continues. New researchers digitize archives that previous generations examined only cursorily. Genealogists share DNA anomalies in online databases, finding patterns in genetic discontinuities that isolated individuals couldn't recognize. Architectural historians re-examine construction timelines with modern engineering knowledge, identifying impossibilities previous eras accepted without question. The photographic record gets reanalyzed with digital enhancement technology, revealing details invisible to earlier investigators. Each discovery generates more questions. A photograph dated 1890 showing completed infrastructure in an area that census records claim was uninhabited. An orphan log listing 300 children processed in a single month, with not one origin recorded. A bridge leading nowhere, built with such precision that modern engineers can't explain its purpose. Census records showing population jumps that immigration logs don't support. These aren't smoking guns proving reset theory, but neither are they easily dismissed as mere historical quirks or documentation failures. The pattern persists. The synchronicity remains. The official explanations continue to feel inadequate, even as alternative theories remain unprovable. Perhaps that's where we must reside, in uncertainty, acknowledging what evidence reveals, while admitting we lack complete understanding. The same photograph from the beginning, State Street, Chicago, 1903, hangs in city archives today. The empty street remains documented, real, undeniable. The question it poses hasn't changed. Who were these cities built for? And why were they empty when they should have been full?